Beyond the thicket. Carl reached the end of his driveway and took a left. He was a bit puzzled as to why he hadn't gone in this direction yet. He moved in nearly 2 weeks ago, but so far his nightly walks hadn't led him towards the overgrown thicket. The bent and mangled trees at the end of the street were covered in strangling ivy. Desiccated thorn bushes hid the rot that lay beneath. The dented old sign that stood before the path into the thicket was aptly lettered with the words, "Dead End." Oh well, he mused to himself. Tonight's as good a night as any to see what lies in this direction. Following this thought, he'd lightly patted his back pocket. 2 odd protuberances met his hand. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 C batteries. The absent-minded dummy had brought along fresh batteries, but no flashlight. He decided it didn't matter since every front lawn had a lamppost. They'd be coming on soon enough, but he was a bit uneasy. His father had taught him the importance of being prepared before leaving the house. He turned and glanced back the way he'd come. A slight bend in the road hid his quaint little bungalow from view. The decision to forego heading back to retrieve his flashlight was made when he stumbled over a raised bit of sidewalk. He agilely recovered himself and slowed his quickened pace. It seemed quite odd that he'd already walked so far in just a couple of minutes. His calculation of just how much time had elapsed changed when the sun disappeared behind the trees. The lamppost still hadn't turned on, and just then Carl heard a strange noise. He spun around, but couldn't make out anything more than a few feet ahead. Something darted past him on his left. He quickly turned toward it, but once again, he couldn't see anything. The light breeze picked up momentum, carrying with it the same noise as before. Now, stiffly at attention, Carl could make out a whimpering moan. He muttered, "Sweet Mary and Joseph," under his breath, and suddenly Carl felt childish. He felt himself out after dark, and there he was, whispering like a frightened little boy in need of a nightlight. He knew that all he had to do was step lightly and follow the sidewalk back home. He turned to head home, but just stood there looking ahead. He turned the other way and met with the same issue. He scratched his head. He thought. I turned back towards the way I came when I first heard that noise. Then I turned again, but then No, that's not right. Carl continued to look each way down the sidewalk, but he just couldn't determine which direction would lead home. The mysterious moaning sounded again. It seemed much closer this time. Carl was shrouded in complete darkness now. He couldn't see his hand in front of his face. And finally, after all these years, he could now empathize with his younger brother, who was deathly afraid of the dark when they were children. He couldn't remember ever being in such utter darkness before in his life. He found it strange that none of the houses on the street had any lights on, not even the bluish glow of a television emanated from any of his neighbors' windows. His thoughts mirrored his frustration and fear. Where is the moon? And why haven't the fucking lampposts turned on yet? Carl sided left until he felt the grass under his foot. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly as he spun around. He started walking guardedly with the grass and the edge of the sidewalk, each supporting a foot. He decided to follow the invisible line between the two different types of terrain beneath his feet until the moon or the lampposts lit his way. The moaning came to his ears again. It was much louder now. Yeah, it's definitely not the wind. His unsteady thoughts reached for some explanation to calm his nerves. He was walking blindly, so he wasn't confident he could travel any faster than a toddler's walk. A moose, maybe. Sure, there are pictures of moose all over town. I saw a moose crossing sign just yesterday. When I get home, I'll look moose calls up online. That's right, just concentrate on getting home and chilling out in front of the computer for the rest of the night. The tightness in his clenched jaw and the bunched wad of muscles in his neck loosened a little once he decided it was just a stupid moose. No moose could compare to the frightening creatures his imagination had begun to concoct. Just then, a lamppost came to life. He was so glad to see again, and there he was, standing right in front of his house. He squinted his eyes to guard against the brilliant glare from the lamppost. Stepping into his yard, he looked side to side and noticed that no other lampposts were lit. Glad to be home, and feeling more than a little disconcerted by his strange excursion, Carl let the observation die on his lawn. He quickened his pace to his porch, and there, lying at the foot of the steps, were 3 newspapers. He remembered fetching the Sunday paper that morning, so he was more than just slightly puzzled. He picked up the nearest one, pulled off the rubber band, and unrolled it. Emblazoned across the front page in bold black was the heading, "Murder on May Street." The accompanying photo was of a police officer standing sentry over the path leading into the thicket. Carl glanced at the top of the page. Tuesday? I don't understand. He quickly skimmed through the article while a horrible feeling began to bubble up from within him. The body of an unidentified man was found brutally. Carl dropped the paper and stumbled back onto his lawn. He slumped to the ground in shock and rolled onto his back. He could see the moon directly above him, spread out across the night sky. It seemed so large and imposing. Just then, the lamppost went out. The moon offered no reprieve from the darkness, as a loud moan echoed along May Street. The boy who was. We stopped checking for monsters under our bed once we realized they were inside us. An unknown quote. "Don't turn the light off, Mommy, please," he said timidly, fear resonating in his voice. His mother laughed lovingly and assured him the nightlight would provide sufficient lighting from whatever he feared would come forth from the darkness once she had left. "Okay, but please check in my closet before you go," he asked of his mother meekly. She decided to humor him and did as he asked. Once satisfied nothing was in there, he seemed a little more at ease and lay down, his young head against the soft pillow. She passed by his bed and kissed his forehead lovingly. "Good night, my sweet boy," she whispered as she stood upright. "I love you, Mommy," he chimed in as she left. Just before she shut the door, "I love you too, Aaron," she said with a smile on her face, as the door sealed him in from the rest of the house. Once she had left, the room immediately became tenfold scarier. The pale nightlight, rather than being reassuring, cast an eerie glow across the room, prompting shadows to dance in the darkness to some unheard tune. Aaron lay in the bed, gripping the covers tightly at his chin. His mother had left the closet door ajar. If he but even closed his eyes with it unclosed, he would be vulnerable to whatever he was sure resided in there once the lights were off. He had to close it if he hoped to get any sleep. He looked around the room for some sort of defense against the creatures that might attack him once he tried to disrupt their plan of escaping. His eyes happened upon the baseball bat propped up against the wall near the door. He scrambled out of bed, disrupting the dance of the shadows as his colossal shadow flickered across the room as he passed through the pale glow of the light on his way to his weapon. Holding the bat in trembling hands, he scanned the room for any possible assailants. There were none he could see. Aaron had broken out into a cold sweat. He could feel the shirt of his pajamas sticking tightly to his torso as his brow accumulated sweat. He wondered if the monsters could smell fear. If they could, he was in for it. He probably reeked of fear and sweat, of course. He held the bat tight and took a step forward. He was going to shut the closet door. Each step felt as though he was wearing lead boots. It was almost painful walking towards what very might be your death. Dead man walking, as they would say. The shadows had begun to dance again. Perhaps it was a dance of death. Aaron began to wonder what the monsters would do to him if the bat could not protect him. He could almost see it slowly stretching out to its full size, towering above him, picking him up and bringing him closer to it, its horribly scarred face full of blisters and warts pouring out of gooey slime. The dead look in its eyes, in row upon row of razor-sharp teeth. Would it bite his head clean off, or simply devour him whole? Aaron came back to reality as he was now at the closet door. He turned back to check the room once more to see if perhaps one of them had found a way around him. There was nothing, thankfully. He could see his room almost perfectly. His creased sheet lay half on the floor, half on the bed, probably from when he had scrambled out of it. The various toys scattered around the room seemed to have gathered to bear witness to the grand event that was about to unfold. The curtains rustled lightly. He had probably just forgotten to close the window properly. Aaron took a deep breath and decided he would face the monster rather than simply shutting the closet door. He exhaled quickly and swung the closet door wide open, bat high above his head, and ready to face his doom. Clothes. That's all he found in the closet. Maybe his mother was right and there really was no such thing as monsters. He breathed yet another deep breath, but the exhalation was more a sigh of relief than anything. There was no monster. He felt emboldened by the fact he would have taken any monster head on. He was a warrior. At least in his eyes he was. He could take on anything.
At the back of his mind, he was almost disappointed now. His adrenaline was rushing. He could feel the blood in his cheeks and hear it in his ears. He was ready to fight a monster. He made his way back to his bed, but with his newfound bravery decided to close the window first. Usually, Aaron would be too scared to open the curtain in the dark out of fear of what would be behind the curtain, or worse yet, what might be looking in on him from the outside. But he was brave now. He was a would-be monster killer. He could close a window and bear looking out the dark window. He approached the curtain and flung the curtain back, bat prepped to swing at any monsters hiding behind it. Nothing. Dang, monsters are scared now, he thought with a smile on his face. They know I'm not scared, and I've got a bat, he told himself. Reaching for the window, he saw it was closed. Realizing his eyes must have played a trick on him in the dark, with nothing but the pale light to provide for his sight, he returned to his bed and threw the bat at the foot of his bed before jumping on it. The adrenaline had washed over him, and he now felt ready for bed, confident in the fact there were no monsters, as well as the fact he had conquered his fear by means of facing that which could have possibly been lurking in the closet. He reached over the edge of his bed to pull up the cover that had been a casualty of his fear and excitement, and had fallen to the ground. Groping for the covers, his heart skipped a beat, as he felt not only the cover, but something much softer beneath them. He had probably dropped the covers on one of his many stuffed animals. He slung himself over the bed to retrieve not only the cover, but the stuffed animal too, as some company in bed would be very welcomed after his ordeal and excitement. The smell washed over him first, as his head neared the edge of the bed. The smell has no description, but if one had to put a name on it, it smelled of death. It penetrated his nostrils as it grew worse once he raised the covers, beneath which was not a stuffed animal. The decomposed face filled with holes and scraps of skin falling off, yellow with decomposition, stared at him. It tried to smile, but the skin around its face was non-existent, and so the smile was just it bearing the few rotten teeth still in its head. "Why don't you come play down here with me, where it's nice and dark?" it said, as it reached a bony and fleshless hand up and pulled Aaron by the throat into the darkness. "Hurry, before it gets too dark," her mother warned. The candles danced weakly, the source of their movement, an open window in the kitchen. Red packed the cupcakes and thermos of soup into her bag. It was but a 15-minute walk to Grandma's house. She would be okay. The candle cast long shadows on the wall as the mother and daughter packed all the goodies to be delivered to Grandma. "If you get lost or scared, phone me. I'll come pick you up," Mother told her, with a touch of fear in her voice. Red's little trips to her grandma's house always made her feel uneasy. Growing up herself, she heard countless stories of the menace in the woods that preyed on children. But they were just that, stories. It was getting dark, clouds rolling through the sky and covering the setting sun. This would not be too much of an inconvenience for Red, as her mobile phone was equipped with a built-in flashlight. Gone were the days of children wandering blindly around in the dark. Now she had a phone that enabled her location to be shown to her mother, a flashlight, as well as the local police station on speed dial. All things considered, Mother felt a bit more at ease. Packed and ready, Mother gave Red a kiss on the cheek, coupled with a tight hug and the parting words of, "Be safe, honey. Stay on the path and call me when you get there. I love you." Hood on and bag on back, Red walked out the door, calling back her love and affection to her mother. Her mother had told her the stories many times, and they often played over in her head as she walked alone. In every bush, she saw it. Every corner she walked around, she expected the menace to be waiting. She could hear its footsteps, keeping pace with her as she walked. She knew it wasn't really there, but the thoughts were scary all the same. She pulled her red hood, a gift from her sweet old grandma, higher up over her head, and continued her brisk walk. Red extracted the wonder of the century from her pocket and pushed the buttons that instructed the device to illuminate her path. It wasn't dark yet, but the bright light was comforting. She glanced over her shoulder, having felt the sensation of someone walking in tandem with her. All that accompanied her was her shadow. Breathing a sigh of relief, she set her eyes back upon her path. A blur shot across her path a good few meters ahead of her. Unsure of what it was in the dark, Red began to run. The phone light bounced as she ran, causing shadows to dance all around her. Maybe it was a dog, she thought, or a raccoon. She didn't know what she saw, but she knew it moved quickly. She wasn't far from Grandma's house now. Maybe she should call Mother, she thought in a panic. Reasoning took over her, and she figured calling her would mean she would have to stop. She certainly was not going to stop with whatever it was behind her. Red could feel her face getting hot. She ran. Tears began to stream down her face. What if it's the menace? She thought to herself. This caused her to sob heavily, snot and tears merging as one on her face. She pawed at her eyes, trying to wipe the tears while running as fast as she could. The blur was even more blurry with tears in her eyes. It came at her fast. She had no time to react. The menace was real. Her screams pierced the treetops. Her phone fell to the ground as she was knocked over, still partially blind from the tears. She looked up in the darkness at what stood before her. It appeared to be a wolf. Although somewhat human, it was covered in hair, and the snarls it emitted shook Red to her core. It circled around the vulnerable child, snapping at her ankles. Red closed her eyes and covered her head. She screamed as loud as she could. Who was to hear a young girl all alone in the woods? The snarling stopped. Red didn't notice as her sobs drowned out all other sound. She lifted her head slowly, unsure if it was a trick to expose herself. She saw a torchlight bouncing towards her, her grandma's worried cries ringing out in the night. "Red, Red baby, I'm coming, sweetheart." Red had never been so happy to see her grandma. "Grandma?" Red stuttered. "It's real. The menace is real. It chased me and attacked me," Red let out, with another heavy sob. "Honey, you tripped and fell on the path. I could just about make you out from my porch. You bolted towards me. I thought you could see me. The next thing I knew, you went head over heels on the floor." Red shook her head and tried to argue. Grandma cradled her head and soothed her. "Let's get you inside and put something on this scrape on your knee." Phone forgotten, Grandma and Red walked slowly inside, where it was warm and smelled like cookies and love. Red sat the basket down on the kitchen table and sat down heavily on the chair. Her knee was bleeding slightly and she winced in pain. "Just 1 second, honey," Grandma told her. "Let me get you something to help with that." Red sat clutching at her knee, tears still rolling gently down her cheek. She immediately began to feel better. Her grandma's kitchen rekindled fond memories of baking and good cooking. She loved coming to Grandma's house. Grandma returned, first aid kit in hand, knee bandaged and cookie in hand. Red felt whole again. Grandma pinched her cheeks and smiled. "My, oh my, aren't those cheeks chubby?" she exclaimed. "You're so cute. I could just eat you." They both laughed and hugged each other. And Grandma stood up before saying, "Red, dear, it's been so nice having you over. There's someone I want to introduce you to." The kitchen door was opened, and Red felt her heart sink. It walked in upright, face twisted in a snarl, saliva spewing. It was a man, but also a wolf. And the teeth, oh God, Red could see them clearly. Its eyes were cold and dead. It was a nightmare personified. "Here's my little pet, honey," Grandma said. "And he's been dying to eat you." I found out the horrifying truth of why sleep exists. We never remember the exact moment we fall asleep. Sure, we remember the minutes leading up to that moment, reciting our grocery list, listening to our spouse snore, replaying an embarrassing moment that happened 10 years ago. But can you recall the exact moment you fell asleep last night? Or how it happened? I've always found this odd. We remember when we wake up, and sometimes we even know the reason. A bad dream, a car honking outside. But how do we fall asleep? What happens in that magical moment that pushes us into dreamland? Nobody knows. It's a mystery, a little black hole in our memory. That's why I decided to conduct a study. My husband thought I was weird. So you're putting an alarm on your phone to go off every 5 minutes as you fall asleep? Why? Because it'll wake me up as I'm falling asleep. I don't get it. I want to know exactly when I fall asleep each night and how. I still don't get it. Well, I didn't expect you to. Eric raised an eyebrow at me. Is that supposed to be some sort of an insult? Maybe. He laughed. Okay, you do your thing, but can you do it in the guest room? I don't want to have to be woken up every 5 minutes. Of course. That night at midnight, I lay on the twin bed in the guest room. My alarms were set. I was ready. The first alarm went off at 12:05. I was still pretty awake. The image that lingered in my mind was of our backyard and what it would look like after the patio was done. I rolled over and closed my eyes. 12:10. Sleepier this time. Had I remembered to buy peas, I could go to the store tomorrow before my meeting. Barely awake, peas and patio tiles melted into each other. I wondered, if I planted some peas in the morning, would they be ready by dinner time? Bingo. Before I opened my eyes, I knew this was it. My thoughts were nonsense. Heavy fatigue immobilized my body. I was just barely asleep. But something felt wrong. It was more than just fatigue keeping my body still. I felt pressure on my chest, as if a dresser had been pulled on top of it, and my forehead stung, as if someone was pinching it. My eyes flew open. A black shadow sat on my chest. Green eyes smoldered in the darkness. Its mouth, if you could call it that, was long and tubular. It connected to my forehead, making a wet, sucking noise. "Get it off, get it off!" I thrashed against the creature. The weight on my chest shifted. Plop. The mouth popped off my forehead. At that same instant, the fog of sleep lifted. My thoughts were clear, my movements were nimble and quick, and the creature was gone. I ran down the hallway, my feet pounding against the carpet. "Eric!" I screamed, throwing his door open. He slept peacefully, completely unaware of the invisible creature that sat on his chest, feeding on his energy, his thoughts. I grabbed his shoulders and shook him awake. "Eric!" I screamed. "Wake up!" His eyes slowly fluttered open. "What's wrong?" he slurred, pulling himself up. I imagined the creature on top of him disengaging, causing him to wake up, even though I couldn't see it. I knew it was there. I knew. I saw it. The creature, it sits on our chest and sucks out our thoughts, our energy, like some sort of parasite. What are you talking about? It causes sleep. As soon as it stopped, I woke up. It causes sleep. It's black and shadowy, and that sounds like sleep paralysis. He wrapped his arms around me and pulled me into a tight hug. "I'm so sorry. I know it can be terrifying, but it isn't real. It wasn't sleep paralysis, Eric. It's a nightmare then. Don't worry. You're safe with me." He pulled me tighter, rocking me gently as if I were a child. Tears streamed down my face as the pieces fit together in my mind. Sleep isn't some restorative function encoded in our DNA. This creature, this thing, causes it, so it can feed on our thoughts, our energy, like some sort of parasite. A parasite that has existed since the beginning of time, living with us, evolving with us, present in every country, every home, every bedroom. We just never see it because no one remembers how they fall asleep. My mom used to be a huge prankster, with emphasis on the used to be. She's slowed down since turning 50. Not that she's boring now, far from it, but she's less dedicated to pranking me or anyone else as she was years ago. One day when I was 15, I came home from school and looked in the mailbox. Inside was an envelope, a blank one. It wasn't signed, there wasn't a stamp, nothing. Simply a pure white envelope. I opened the envelope and read the letter inside. Hey, little brother, it's been a while. In fact, the last time I've seen you, you were just 2 years old. By the way, it's your older sister. Shocking, right? I hope Mom told you about me. This introduction weirded me out, but looking at the childlike handwriting of the letter, I assumed it was my mom trying to pull a fast one, so I kept reading. I was honestly hoping for some funny twist at the end of the letter or something. Hey, I'm sure you've grown a lot and changed. I just hope you still remember me and all our moments together from your childhood. We had done so many things together before I left you and our parents. At this point, it started feeling weird. Mom and Dad divorced when I was 3 or 4. She never spoke about that. She wasn't happy whenever somebody mentioned him around her. He paid child support and Mom worked her ass off, so I never had anything missing in my life. I thought Mom was pulling one of those darker pranks she'd do every once in a while, like pretending she broke both her legs one time before springing up into dance just before I lost my shit. I kept on reading. If you don't remember, allow me to remind you. I was there when you walked for the first time. I was there when you said, Mama, for the first time. All these big moments, I was there. I also tried forcing you to play with my dolls, but you were having none of it. It was such a mess. I'm sorry about that. I hope you're not mad. Anyway, little bro, I'm glad to say that I finally know where you're living. The new house looks gorgeous. Believe me, I'm dying to see you all again. See you soon. I love you, Eva. There wasn't even a joke at the end of it, just a weird, old letter about some crap that made no sense. I felt disappointed in my mother's comical abilities for the first and only time at that moment. Walking inside, I heard Mom in our kitchen. She was talking on the phone. She smiled and waved at me once she saw me come in. I waited for her to finish the call. Once she did, I dropped the letter onto the table and said, "Ha ha, very funny, Mom, had me dying over that thing." "Huh? What's that?" she asked, seemingly genuinely unaware of the letter's existence. "You wrote this letter, didn't you? What was it about my sister, Eva? You're creative, Mom, that's for sure," I said, walking out of the kitchen. "What?" she questioned, genuine surprise in her tone. "Come on, Ma, cut the act. You wrote this thing, didn't you?" I said, turning to face her once more. "No, I didn't." She picked up the letter and started reading it. Her eyes widened with genuine fear, and she started mumbling to herself. "Mom?" I said. She just stood there, clutching at that piece of paper, mumbling to herself. Her eyes were wandering wildly across the text. "Mom," I called again. She was in a trance of sorts, completely fixated on the letter. "Mom, are you all right?" She mumbled something, slowly shifting her eyes to me. "Huh, I can't understand what you're... Eva, my little girl. My poor little girl, the fire. What the hell, Mom? My girl. She died when you were 3. She died in a fire." It hit me, a whole whirlwind of emotions that I couldn't even fully comprehend. My mom grabbed her phone once again and started dialing something. I just stood there, trying to digest what I had just learned. It was so strange. There was a moment of doubt. I thought once again my mom was just playing a trick on me, a prank, and then she said it. "Get your stuff. We're going to Grandma's." It finally sank in. I tried asking, but Mom had no clue what this whole situation was about. She didn't know where the letter came from. She kept saying she felt like we just had to get out, a feeling she described as having a cold hand clutch at her heart and press on it again and again. We moved to my grandmother's, and on the way there, I learned that I had a sister, 10 years older than me, my sister Eva. She died falling into a pyre during a local festival. The death of Eva caused a local uproar, and it was all over local media. It also tore my family apart. The death of my sister led to the divorce of my parents. No wonder Mom never spoke about it. Our house caught on fire the next morning. No one knows what happened. I do remember hearing one of the neighbors talking to my mom about it at some point. He swore he saw a girl silhouette running around the house, moving about in a fit of pure rage the night we left.
The first night I heard the tapping, I had just ignored it as nothing. My bedroom is on the first floor of my family's house and is the only one on the ground floor. Everyone else is upstairs, which I always joked that I'd be the one to survive a fire, since I'd be able to escape faster than any of them. As well, my window faces our small suburban front lawn, next to the street and sidewalk. There's a garden bed of roses my brother and I built for Mother's Day one year, though we just let it do its own thing these days instead of tending to it. This resulted in one particularly annoying branch of thorns that sways in the wind at night and had a tendency to smack against the window. It was one of those annoyances that make you sigh, but you don't really care enough to deal with it. So when I first heard the tapping, I didn't think much of it. It was just a rose bush after all, and I didn't think much of it the second time, or the third, and soon enough, I'd lost track of the number of times the tapping had woken me up. So it caught me by surprise one night when I listened a bit more carefully and found that the tapping sounded louder than usual. I sat up groggily and reached out, around for the blinds, trying to move them aside enough to get a look outside. The branch was just swaying as normal, but when it did hit the glass, it wasn't as loud as what I had previously heard. My window also had a bit of a draft, and the wind didn't sound nearly strong enough to make the branch hit very hard. Confused, I just lied back down and went to sleep. The next night, it woke me up again. It was louder than it had ever been. I growled, being awoken from my slumber, then quickly pulled the blinds away to look outside. The branch was still, and there was no wind. A slight shiver trickled down my vertebrae, with my imagination jumping to the conclusion that something had been at my window. I told my parents about the tapping the next morning. My dad thought I was just overreacting, and that the wind had been blowing hard for just a minute before settling down. He got out the garden trimmers and cut the branch that afternoon. The tapping continued the next night. Now I was getting spooked. Upon being woken this time, I rushed to the blinds to lift them up. Nothing was at the window that could have made the sounds, but the moon was out, and my heart leapt into my throat when I noticed what showed up in the moon's reflection. Fingerprints. I woke my parents up and told them that someone might have been trying to get into my room at night. My dad checked out the flower bed but found nothing. No footsteps in the soil, no trampled grass, nothing. But the fingerprints were evidently there. He just said that someone must have put their hand on the window while doing some yard work or housework. Heck, he even suggested that he might have placed his hand there for balance the day before when removing the branch. Though I was skeptical and still a little worried, I accepted his response. I decided that night I'd sleep on the living room couch, also located next to a window. It was irrational, sure, but my mind was too uneasy to sleep in that bed next to the street where anyone could have been running up to my window and freaking me out in the middle of the night. Eventually, I got comfortable in an awkward position and welcomed the embrace of sleep. I woke up to the tapping yet again. And for the next few nights, I slept around in different rooms, both near and away from windows. I wasn't going to sleep in my parents' bed or with my brother in his room. I was a teen, and teens don't do stuff like that. But the tapping was driving me nuts. It continued following me around every night, and despite many sleepless nights waiting for the tapping to come so I could immediately rip the curtains asunder, there was no sign of anyone or anything causing the tapping. Eventually, I came to the conclusion that the tapping was probably in my head, possibly even coming from my dreams or even nightmares, and that I was going to keep hearing it as long as I believed in it. So I returned to my room and tucked myself under the covers, staring at the blinds that blocked my view of the night. And soon enough, sleep came. The tapping came yet again, but this time it stopped abruptly. For a moment, I thought that it was over, that I had overcome this craziness. That was until I heard a wooden creak, the sound of my window opening. I flung off my covers and immediately yanked up my blinds to find the face of a bald man staring back at me. His eyes were fully open, unblinking, bloodshot to hell and back. His facial hair was ragged and patchy, with scratch marks and tiny drops of blood pooling where the skin was most bare. I could see his skin stretched out mercilessly over his bones, and his crusty fingertips were inside my room as the window was open an entire inch, dirt lining the very small edges of his clearly well-bitten nails. My psyche couldn't take it anymore. I screamed louder than I had ever screamed before in my life, and as I heard my parents rushing downstairs to my aid, the man took off from our yard, only wearing a pair of stained workout shorts as he passed under a streetlight and disappeared into the night. The cops could find no trace of the man. He had been standing on the bricks of the flower bed, leaving no full footprints for them to use. There also weren't any fingerprint to go off of. They theorized he had just been tapping the window with his index fingers over and over, since some of the prints matched each other. All I know is I'm never sleeping on the ground floor ever again.
Hey, thanks so much for spending this few minutes with me while I narrated that story. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, do me a favor and hit that thumbs up button for me. I'd really appreciate that. It helps out the channel as I'm trying to grow it. And if you're not already subscribed and you like what I'm doing here, then do me a favor and also hit that subscribe button. I really appreciate that. And thanks. And I will see you on the next video. Until then, stay dark, everyone.